I am Nicole Riley, 33 years old. Last Thanksgiving, my parents placed 3 glittering gift bags in front of my sister's 3 children, loudly declaring, "This is a reward for the grandchildren who make their grandparents proud." In front of my 2 children, 8-year-old Lily and 5-year-old Sam, there was only empty space. Sam looked up, tugging at my sleeve, confused. Lily? She just quietly hid the turkey picture she'd drawn for her grandmother under the table. My 14-year-old nephew glanced at my kids and smirked. Guess they just aren't worthy. Nobody corrected him. My parents kept right on chewing their turkey. I didn't scream. With the discipline I'd learned after years of service, I stood up, pushed back my chair, put on my kids' coats, and walked straight out the door. When I got home, I sent exactly one message to the family group chat. Seconds later, my phone started exploding. Mom, Dad, then my sister calling nonstop. But there's one thing none of them know. What I do next will cost them a lot more than a gift bag. Welcome to Noble Revenge, where ordinary people stand up, set boundaries, and take back their dignity. If you've ever been the outsider in your own blood family, this story is for you. Like, comment, and subscribe. Now, let me tell you how it all began. The Ford idled in the driveway, its engine a low, ragged growl against the freezing Pennsylvania night. Inside the cabin, the air felt thin. Cold. It took exactly 22 minutes to get from my parents' house back to our apartment. 22 minutes of heavy, suffocating silence. I kept my hands at 10 and 2. My knuckles were white, bone stark against the worn leather of the steering wheel. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I couldn't, not yet. I just watched the yellow lines of the road get swallowed by the dark. A small, thin voice drifted from the back seat. It was Lily. Mommy? I didn't blink. Yes, baby. Why doesn't Grandma like us? The question was a jagged piece of glass in my throat. My grip tightened until the wheel groaned under my palms. I didn't cry. I had forgotten how to do that a long time ago, somewhere between the sand and the sleepless nights of my old life. She's mistaken, Lily, I said, my voice as flat and hard as a slab of granite. You did nothing wrong. You and Sam are exactly who you are supposed to be. Remember that. I pulled into our gravel lot. I got them inside, moved them through the routine like I was running a checklist. Pajamas, teeth, bed. I tucked the blankets tight around their shoulders, the way I used to pack a rucksack. Neat, orderly, secure. Once their bedroom door clicked shut, the silence of the apartment rushed in. It was loud. It was the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. I walked into the kitchen and didn't turn on the overhead light. I didn't need it. The pale, sickly blue glow from my phone sitting on the scarred wooden table was enough. I poured a glass of tap water. No ice. I sat down and watched the screen. It was flickering, pulsing. Diane, my mother. She had sent 4 long paragraphs. I scrolled through the words, my eyes tracking the lies like I was looking for a leak in a supply chain. She called it encouragement. She said the gift bags were a way to celebrate academic achievement and provide motivation for Lily and Sam to do better. Motivation. For a 5-year-old, I felt a bitter taste in the back of my mouth. I looked around my small, cramped kitchen. 2 years ago, I had sent every dime of my hazard pay. The extra money I earned for standing in the heat and the dust while people shot at each other, back to this town. I sent it so Diane could rip out her old rotting cabinets and put in white marble and a sub-zero fridge. I paid for the very table I had just been forced to leave. Now, my kids didn't even have a seat at it. I swiped to the next message. Frank, my father. Nicole, for the love of God, just apologize to your mother. You know how she gets. Just drop it so we can have some peace for once. Peace. His version of peace was a slow death. He was a man who would watch his own grandchildren bleed if it meant he didn't have to hear his wife raise her voice during dinner. He was a coward who traded his daughter's dignity for a quiet night in front of the TV. Then came Monica, my sister. You always have to make it about you, don't you? You ruined the whole vibe. The kids were happy until you threw your little tantrum. I didn't reply. I didn't give them the satisfaction of my anger. Instead, I tapped the screen with a steady finger. Power button. Volume down. Screenshot. 1, 2, 14 times. I saved every word, every lie, every piece of psychological filth they threw at me. I moved them into a folder. I named it Evidence. I set the phone to Do Not Disturb. The blue light died. The kitchen went black. I sat there in the dark for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. I was done being an ATM. I was done being the backup plan. They thought they were teaching me a lesson. They didn't realize I was the one taking notes. The weeks crawled by. I stayed away. I worked the ovens at 4 in the morning, my back aching, my hands smelling like yeast and salt. I ignored the missed calls. I ignored the bait. Then, the first week of December arrived. A heavy cream-colored envelope landed in my mailbox. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. It was Diane's perfect, practiced script. I opened it standing at the counter. A Target gift card fell out. $25. I looked at the card inside. It was printed with a wreath and some holly. Inside, in that same neat handwriting, it said, "For Lily and Sam." My name wasn't there, not a mention, not a to Nicole. It was as if I had been erased from the ink. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I wasn't even a person. I was just the gatekeeper to the grandchildren they wanted to play with like dolls. I looked at the card, then at the empty space where my name should have been. I didn't feel the sting I expected. I felt something else. A cold, sharp clarity. The bloodline was done. The bridge was ash. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd saved weeks ago. "Rachel Kim's office," a voice said. "This is Nicole Riley," I said, my voice steady. "I have the files ready. It's time to start." The kitchen was an icebox at 4 in the morning. I didn't bother with the heat. I liked the sharp, biting air. It felt honest. I clicked the overhead fluorescent light, and it hummed to life with a sickly flicker, casting long, jagged shadows across the stainless steel prep table. I pulled a 60-pound sack of flour from the pantry. My lower back gave a hot, sharp twinge, the kind of deep ache that settles into your bones when you've spent too many years carrying weight you weren't meant to hold. I ignored it. I scooped. I weighed. 300 grams. Exactly. The digital scale didn't have a reason to lie to me. People, on the other hand, did it for sport. The heavy industrial mixer was a beast. It groaned as the steel hooks tore through cold butter and sugar, a low, rhythmic thumping that echoed off the linoleum walls. I stood there, arms crossed, watching the paddle spin. 73 pies, salted caramel apple. The smell of burnt sugar and sharp cinnamon began to fill the room, thick enough to coat the back of my throat. It was a good smell. It smelled like a job. It smelled like staying afloat. Every pie was a brick in the wall I was building to keep my kids safe from the street. I moved through the movements with a twitchy, practiced speed. I didn't think about my mother's voice. I didn't think about my father's silence. I just watched the timer. Physical exhaustion was the only thing that kept the noise in my head from getting too loud. January hit the town like a wet, gray blanket. The holiday rush had died down, but my orders didn't just slow, they evaporated. I was at the ShopRite on a Tuesday morning, staring at the price of a gallon of milk, when I saw Mrs. Gable from the First Methodist Church. Usually she was the type to corner me for 20 minutes just to ask about my crust recipe. Today she saw me coming and suddenly became fascinated by the nutrition label on a can of generic peas. She turned her cart and hurried toward the pharmacy aisle without a word. It wasn't just her, it was the whole town. I could feel the weight of the stairs at the gas station. I heard the sudden hush when I walked into the local hardware store. Diane had been busy. I knew how she worked. She'd spend her Sunday afternoon sitting in the back pew, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, telling anyone who'd listen that I'd cut her off from the kids. "She's just so troubled since she got out," she'd sigh, her voice dripping with that fake Sunday morning pity. "We've tried everything, but some daughters just don't want to be saved." I sat at my small kitchen table that night, the one with the scarred wood and the wobbly leg. My laptop screen was a sea of red. Orders were down 44% in a single month. That wasn't a bad streak. That was a hit job. The rent for my commercial kitchen space was due in 5 days. The electric bill sat on top of a pile of mail, a neon orange notice from the utility company that looked like a warning shot. Diane was doing more than talking. She was starving me out. She knew my margins. She knew I was paying for Lily and Sam's health insurance out of my own pocket. She wanted me broke and desperate. She wanted me crawling back to her marble countertop kitchen, begging for a loan so she could put the leash back on. The next afternoon, I was dropping off a small batch of cookies at the flower shop downtown. Patty Nguyen didn't even let me set the boxes down before she grabbed my arm and pulled me into the back storage room. The air back there was thick with the scent of damp earth and refrigerated roses. Patty didn't do small talk. She slammed the heavy door shut, clicked the lock, and shoved an iPad under my nose. Her eyes were dark, buzzing with a kind of anger that made my skin prickle. "You seen this yet?" she asked, her voice a low, sharp rasp. I looked at the screen. It was an Instagram page. Lawford Kitchen. There was my sister, Monica. She was wearing a $100 linen apron, smiling in a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine. She was holding a pie. My pie. It wasn't just the flavor, it was my specific signature lattice work. My exact caramel drizzle pattern. The caption underneath made the blood in my veins turn to slush. Finally sharing my secret family recipe. Grandma always said I had the natural touch. Order now for the winter bake-off. I scrolled down. My mother had commented at the very bottom. "So proud of my girl. We only invest our time in the family members who actually show gratitude." I stared at Monica's smug, filtered face. My hands didn't shake. They didn't sweat. They just went still. Stone still. I felt a cold, hard knot tie itself in the center of my chest, tighter than a cinch on a pack. "She's not just talking, Nicole," Patty whispered, leaning in close. "She's selling them to the church council. She's using your old client list from the fundraiser. She's stealing the food right out of your kids' mouths." I handed the iPad back to her. I didn't say a word. I just thought about the 44%. I thought about the orange bill on my table and the 22 minutes of silence in the car. "Nicole?" Patty touched my shoulder. "What are you going to do?" I looked at the rows of dead stems in the corner trash can. I thought about the files I'd already started saving. "I'm not going to do anything," I said, my voice barely audible over the hum of the flower fridge. "The law is." The blue light of the phone screen burned my eyes in the pitch-black cabin of my car. I sat in the driveway, the heater blowing a weak, dusty draft that did nothing to take the edge off the Pennsylvania winter. Lawford Kitchen. That was the name Monica had chosen. I scrolled through the photos, my thumb hovering over the glass like it was a live wire. There were the brown butter tarts, the salted caramel apple pies. The lattice work on the crust was exact. My signature, a pattern I'd spent months perfecting while working double shifts at a bakery in town. There was Monica, posing in a linen apron that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill. She was leaning against her $12,000 marble countertop, smiling that perfect, practiced smile. Everything was filtered. Everything was fake. I looked at a close-up of a pear galette. I knew that crust. I knew the specific way the edges were crimped. I looked at the caption, "Finally sharing my secret family recipe. Grandma always taught me that the secret is in the patience. Order now for the winter bake-off." A heavy, bitter knot tied itself in my gut. My mother, Diane, had commented at the very bottom. So proud of my girl. It is wonderful to finally see this talent recognized. Our family only invests in those who truly value our traditions. The words were a direct hit. A public announcement that I had been replaced, my hard work rebranded, and my existence discarded. I felt the familiar ache in my jaw from clenching it too tight. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't scream. I just memorized every pixel of her theft. I went into the apartment, moving through the dark like a ghost. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't want to see the cracked linoleum or the pile of bills on the counter. I walked straight to the bedroom and dropped to my knees. The floor was freezing. I reached under the bed and hauled out the heavy metal trunk. It was a relic from my old life, dented and scratched, smelling of cold iron and dry earth. I flipped the heavy latches. Clack, clack. The sound was sharp, final. I reached inside and pulled out a small yellowed notebook. The cover was stained with coffee and grease. I flipped through the pages. Most were written in a cramped hand, dated from 5 years ago. I remembered writing those recipes during the dead of night, sitting on a folding chair in a drafty hut halfway across the world. I had refined those measurements while the wind rattled the tin roof and the silence outside felt like a threat. These weren't just recipes. They were my survival. They were the only things I had brought back with me that felt whole. And now, Monica was selling them like they were a hobby she'd picked up between Pilates classes. The next morning, the air in the city felt thick and gray. I sat in Rachel Kim's office on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and old paper. The walls were a dull beige, and the only sound was the rhythmic ticking of a clock that seemed to be counting down to my next bill. Rachel didn't offer me coffee. She didn't ask how I was doing. She sat behind a desk piled high with manila folders and looked at me with eyes that were as cold as a February morning. I liked that. I wasn't there for sympathy. I was there for a strike. I placed a thick black folder on her desk. The sound of the paper hitting the wood was heavy. Inside were my original notebooks, the time-stamped certificates from the baking courses I'd taken with my own money, and the bank statements showing every cent I'd spent on ingredients and equipment over the last 2 years. I reached into my bag and pulled out a stack of cash, $1,500. It was all in $20 and $50 bills. Money I'd hoarded by skipping meals and wearing the same pair of boots until the soles were thin as paper. I pushed the pile toward her. I want to block the trademark application for Lawford Kitchen, I said. My voice was a flat line. And I want a cease and desist, sent by the end of the day. She's using my intellectual property and claiming it's a family legacy. It's a lie. Rachel didn't blink. She counted the cash with the efficiency of a machine. Her long fingers moved quickly, the paper snapping in the quiet room. I'll have the draft ready by 3, she said. She didn't smile. She just picked up her pen. I walked out of the office and into the biting wind of the street. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from Patty. It was an image file. I opened it, and for the first time in a long time, my breath hitched. It was a screenshot of a private group chat. The name at the top read, The Planning Committee. The members were Diane, Monica, and my father, Frank. The date on the messages was 14 days before Thanksgiving. Diane, make sure there are no gift bags for Nicole's kids. She needs to feel the weight of her choices. If she wants to be independent, she can provide for them herself. This is how she learns. Monica, I've got the bags for my 3. It'll be perfect. It'll set the tone for when I announce my business. She won't be able to say a word without looking like the jealous sister. Frank, if that's what you think is best, Diane, I just want a quiet dinner. My heart rate didn't speed up. It slowed. It went deep and steady. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. It was a coordinated hit. They had used my children as a prop in their little play. Before we go any further into the dark, I have to ask you something. If you've ever had a sibling or a parent steal your hard-earned credit while you were struggling to survive, drop the word alone in the comments. Let me know I'm not the only one who has had to see the people who were supposed to love me turn into my worst enemies. Hit the like button and subscribe right now, because the next move I make is going to change everything for the Townsends. I looked at the screenshot one last time, my eyes burning. The betrayal wasn't a sting anymore, it was a map. I knew exactly where the weak points were. Monica wanted to be a girl boss? Fine, I was going to give her a masterclass in how a real business owner handles a thief. I tucked the phone away and felt the cold air fill my lungs. I wasn't just Nicole Riley, the struggling mom anymore. I was the person they should have never made an enemy. The planning committee, I whispered to the empty sidewalk. I hope you planned for this. The storage room of the flower shop was a concrete box that smelled of damp earth and chemical fertilizer. Patty stood by the heavy cooler door, her arms crossed, watching me with a look that was half pity and half fear. I did not care about either. I only cared about the light. The harsh, fluorescent glare from the iPad screen was reflecting off my eyes, burning into the back of my skull. I swiped. Then I swiped again. The blue light felt like a physical weight. The group chat name at the top was the Planning Committee. It sounded like something from a local PTA meeting or a church bake-off. It was not. It was a ledger of cold-blooded intent. I stared at the timestamps. November 10th, November 12th. 14 days before the turkey was even out of the freezer, my mother had already decided to gut my children's joy. Diane. Make sure there are no gift bags for Nicole's kids. She needs to feel the weight of her choices. If she wants to play the independent woman, she can provide for them herself. This is how she learns a lesson. Then came Monica, my sister. She was the one who suggested buying the cheap headphones in bulk for her own kids, knowing Lily and Sam would be sitting right there with nothing. She called it efficiency. I called it a hit. Monica. It will set the tone. She will not be able to say a word without looking like the jealous sister. I will announce my business right after. She will be too stunned to react. And Frank, my father, the man who taught me how to ride a bike and then let his wife push me into traffic. Frank, if that is what you think is best, Diane, I just want a quiet dinner. The air in the room felt thick enough to choke on. I looked at the digital text, the blue-white letters dancing on the screen. My throat felt tight, a sharp, stinging pressure building behind my ribs, but I forced it down. I had spent 3 years in some of the hardest places on this planet, places where the wind screamed and the dust never settled. I had shrapnel scars on my right calf that turned purple when it rained. In those places, I worked with people who would have thrown themselves into the path of a bullet to save me. We did not share blood, but we shared a bond that was forged in the dark. Now I was standing in a flower shop in Pennsylvania, and the woman who had birthed me was using my 5-year-old son's tears as a lever to pry open my bank account. It was friendly fire, the kind that hurts the worst because you never see it coming from inside your own lines. Diane had ended the thread with a final, jagged thought. She will have to come back and beg for money before Christmas. I clicked the iPad screen off. The room went dim. I handed the device back to Patty. My hands were steady. My breathing was slow and deep, the way I used to time it when I was checking an inventory list in a warehouse. No tears. Tears were for people who still had hope. I was past hope. I was into the work now. Thanks, Patty, I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Someone older, harder. Nicole, I am so sorry, she whispered. Her voice was shaking. Do not be, I replied. I walked out the door and did not look back. When I got back to my apartment, I did not change my clothes. I did not eat. I sat down at the small desk in the corner of my living room and opened my laptop. The fan hummed, a low, mechanical whir that felt like company. I started moving the files. I created 3 separate folders on the cloud. One for the trademark office, one for the lawyer, one for me. I uploaded the screenshots Patty had sent. I uploaded the photos of my original baking notebooks. I uploaded the receipts for the white marble counters I'd paid for in Diane's house. Then, I turned on the printer. The sound of the paper feeding through the machine was a sharp, rhythmic snapping. I printed all 12 pages of the group chat. I did not look at the words as they came out. I did not need to. They were already etched into my brain. I gathered the warm sheets, squared the edges against the desk, and pressed the heavy metal stapler down. Clack! The sound was final. It was a seal. I opened my email and attached the encrypted files. I addressed it to Rachel Kim. Subject line: Additional evidence for Lawford case. Body. The trap was set 14 days before the event. Here's the proof of intent. I hit send. The progress bar crawled across the screen and then vanished. Done. For the next 21 days, I went to ground. I worked the ovens at 4 in the morning. I delivered my pies. I picked up my kids from school. I did not answer the phone when the Townsend landline showed up on my caller ID. I did not check the family group chat. I was a ghost. I was waiting for the clock to run out. On a gray Thursday afternoon, the silence finally broke. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the light from the window fading into a dull bruise when my laptop chimed. It was an email from the state trademark office. I opened it. My eyes skipped over the legal jargon until I found the line that mattered. Trademark application for Lawford Kitchen has been suspended due to pending copyright dispute and evidence of prior use. I leaned back in my chair. The house was quiet. My kids were playing in the next room. I looked at the screen and felt the first flicker of something that was not anger. It was the feeling of the wire being pulled tight. Diane and Monica were about to find out that when you plan a lesson for someone else, you better make sure you know the subject matter yourself. The net was in the water. All I had to do was pull. 10:30 at night is a dangerous time in this town. It's when the silence gets too heavy and the secrets start to rot. I was in the kitchen, smoothing out a fresh batch of parchment paper, making sure every corner was squared with the edge of the counter. It was a habit I couldn't shake. Everything had to be straight, even when the world outside was crooked. Then the banging started. It wasn't a knock. It was the sound of someone trying to break a piece of wood with their bare hands. A heavy rhythmic thud that made the glass in the windows rattle in their frames. I didn't rush. I wiped my hands on my apron, walked to the front door, and flipped on the porch light. The orange bulb flickered once, twice, before casting a sickly glow over the porch. Diane was standing there. Her hair, usually sprayed into a stiff silver helmet, was coming undone. Her face was a blotchy, angry red, and even through the thick wood, I could smell the sour, fermented tang of the cheap boxed wine she kept hidden behind the laundry detergent. I didn't open the main door. I just unlatched the heavy wooden one and left the mesh screen door locked between us. I stood there, arms crossed, my back as straight as a steel rod. "Withdraw it, Nicole," she hissed. Her voice was a ragged scrape against the quiet of the street. "You call that lawyer of yours right now and tell her it was a mistake. You're making us look like trash in front of the whole town. People at church are asking questions. You're shaming this family over a few damn cakes." I didn't flinch. I watched a moth batter itself against the flickering porch light. "You chose the gift bags, Diane," I said, my voice low, dropping into that deep, flat tone that usually shut people up. "You left 2 seats empty at your table. This isn't about cakes. It's about the fact that you thought you could starve me out. This is just the bill coming due." She staggered back a step, her eyes wide and glassy. She tried to shift gears, her mouth wobbling as she reached for the distraught mother routine. I didn't give her the chance to start the waterworks. I grabbed the handle of the heavy oak door and slammed it shut. The click of the deadbolt was the only answer she got. 15 minutes later, the landline on the kitchen wall started screaming. I didn't pick up. I watched the answering machine reel spin until the ringing stopped. Then it started again. On the third attempt, I picked up the receiver. I didn't say hello. Nicole, my father's voice came through the wire. He sounded tired, worn down, like a man who had spent 40 years being hollowed out from the inside. Your mother is in the living room crying her eyes out. My head is pounding. Just, for the love of God, can't you just let the bakery thing go? Give her the recipes. Let Monica have the name. I just want some peace in this house. Do you want me to spend the rest of my life dealing with this? I leaned against the wall, staring at the scuff marks on the linoleum floor. A memory hit me, sharp and cold. I was 18 years old, standing on the front porch with a rucksack over my shoulder, ready to get on a bus that would take me half a world away. I was terrified. My stomach was in knots. My father had stood by the screen door, hands in his pockets. He didn't hug me. He didn't tell me he was proud or that he'd miss me. He had just looked at the floor and whispered, "Don't make your mother sad while you're gone, Nicole. I don't want to hear about it." Even when I was heading into the dark, his only concern was the volume level in his own living room. He was a man who lived in the shadow of a bully because it was easier than standing in the light. "Frank," I said, my voice like a razor, "Monica is a thief. She didn't just take a recipe. She's trying to take the food off Sam and Lily's plates. And you're calling me because your wife is making too much noise? Nicole, she's your mother. Ask yourself something, Dad." I cut him off, my grip on the phone tightening until my knuckles cracked. Ask yourself why you sat there and watched her treat your grandkids like they didn't exist. Ask yourself why you let her walk all over them just so you could finish your turkey in peace. "I just want things back to normal," he mumbled. "There is no normal," I said. "There is only what happens next." I hung up. I didn't wait for him to sigh or make another excuse. I reached down and pulled the cord out of the wall jack with a sharp tug. The house went silent. Truly silent. No more ringing, no more crying through the wire. I walked through the apartment, checking the locks. I checked on the kids. They were sleeping, Sam's small hand curled into a fist. Lily with her hair fanned out across the pillow. They were safe. I went back to the kitchen, poured the rest of my lukewarm coffee down the sink, and watched the brown liquid swirl away. I reached over and flipped the switch for the kitchen lights. One by one, the rooms went dark. I stood in the middle of the living room, letting my eyes adjust to the shadows. Tomorrow morning was the farmer's market. Tomorrow, Monica would be standing in her fancy booth with her fake smile and my stolen work. I thought about the black folder sitting on my desk. I thought about the receipts and the screenshots. The cleaning of the ranks was over. The house was clear. Now it was time to go to work. I lay down on the sofa, fully clothed, and closed my eyes. I didn't sleep, but I didn't need to. I just waited for the sun to come up over the hills, knowing that when it did, the Townsends wouldn't have a single place left to hide. The metal poles of the tent clacked together in the pre-dawn fog, a cold, hollow sound that echoed across the empty parking lot of the Millfield Farmers Market. It was 5:45 a.m. The air was thick with the smell of damp asphalt and the faint, bitter scent of roasted coffee from the early bird vendors. My breath came out in short, gray puffs. My hands, rough and calloused from months of kneading dough and scrubbing industrial pans, felt stiff in the biting cold. I didn't mind. The physical sting kept me sharp. I worked with a steady, quiet rhythm. Every peg was driven into the ground with a single, heavy strike. Every crate was stacked exactly where it belonged. Booth 14. My spot. I'd spent 6 months eating canned soup and wearing the same threadbare flannel shirt just to afford the rent for this 12-foot square of pavement and the industrial furnace that hummed in my commercial kitchen. To anyone else, it was just a stall. To me, it was the hill I was going to stand on. At the center of my table, I placed a small, hand-drawn sign. It was Lily's work, a bunch of lopsided flowers and the words "Townsend Sweets" written in shaky purple crayon. I smoothed the edges of the white tablecloth until the fabric was tight and flat. No wrinkles, no mistakes. I stood back and waited, my arms crossed over my chest, watching the sun begin to crawl over the horizon. By 8 a.m., the quiet was gone. The lot was a swarm of noise, the rattle of tailgates, the shouting of vendors, the smell of diesel exhaust. Then I saw it. A white, gleaming SUV pulled up to the curb, parking half on the sidewalk like the rules didn't apply to it. Monica hopped out. She was wearing a designer coat and boots that had never seen a day of real work. Her husband, Craig, trailed behind her, his face red from the effort of hauling heavy plastic bins. They set up 15 yards away. I watched Monica direct him like a stage manager. Within 20 minutes, a massive vinyl banner was unfurled. Lawford Kitchen, it screamed in gold, cursive letters. It was flashy. It was expensive. It was a lie. Then my parents arrived, Diane and Frank. My mother didn't look my way once. She marched straight to Monica's booth, adjusting the display of pies, my pies, with a proud maternal smile. Frank followed her, handing out flyers to passing neighbors, laughing and shaking hands. They were playing the role of the perfect, supportive family. They moved through the crowd, their voices loud and cheerful, acting as if I were invisible. As if I were just some stranger at booth 14 who didn't belong. The shunning was a cold weight in my stomach, but I didn't let it show. I didn't move. I didn't shout. I stood behind my counter and sold my bread and my pies to the few regulars who still dared to look me in the eye. I felt the stares. I heard the whispers from the church ladies. Such a shame, they'd murmur, looking from Monica's glittering display to my plain, quiet booth. By 11 a.m., the market was at its peak. The heat was rising off the pavement, and the crowd was thick. Monica, emboldened by the long line at her booth, decided it was time for a victory lap. She walked over, her arms crossed, a smug, condescending look on her face. She stopped just in front of my table, her eyes scanning Lily's drawing with a look of pure disgust. She leaned in, her voice a low, jagged whisper that barely carried over the noise of the crowd. "Withdraw the claim, Nicole," she said, her eyes cold. "Craig's already got his lawyers on standby. You're just making yourself look desperate. Nobody here wants to buy from a bitter, jealous sister. Just walk away before you make yourself look like even more of a fool." I didn't answer. I didn't blink. I could feel the eyes of the customers around us turning our way. They were waiting for the explosion. They were waiting for me to scream, to cry, to fulfill the image Diane had been painting of me for months. I didn't give them that satisfaction. I moved slowly. I reached under the table and grabbed the strap of my old, faded backpack. The zipper gave a sharp, metallic sound as I pulled it open. My heart rate stayed flat, deep, and steady. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt like a judge about to read a verdict. I pulled out the black binder. It was heavy, packed with 12 pages of color-printed evidence and the original oil-stained notebook from my time away. I placed it on the rough wood of the table. Thud. The sound was heavy. It was final. The people standing in line went quiet. Monica's smirk didn't vanish, but her eyes flickered to the binder. She didn't know what was inside yet. She thought this was a fight about feelings. She didn't realize I'd brought the receipts. If you have ever had to stand in the cold and watch a family member take credit for your sweat and tears, I need you to drop the word truth in the comments right now. Support this journey by hitting the like button and subscribing, because what happens when I flip this first page is going to tear the Lawford kitchen apart, piece by piece. I kept my hand flat on the cover of the binder. I looked Monica straight in the eye, and for the first time all day, I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. "You want to talk about lawyers, Monica?" I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Then let's talk about the law." I flipped the cover. Monica's face didn't just pale, it went gray. The stage was set, the crowd was watching, and for the Townsends, the show was finally over. The black binder sat on the rough cedar table like a lead weight. The crowd at the Millfield Farmers Market didn't move. The air was thick with the scent of overripe peaches, and the hot, oily smell of a nearby funnel cake stand. Monica stood frozen. Her expensive linen apron, the one without a single flower stain on it, looked absurd under the harsh Pennsylvania sun. She tried to laugh, a high, brittle sound that died in the back of her throat when she saw the look in my eyes. "You want to talk about Craig's lawyers, Monica?" I said. My voice was a flat, dry scrape. "Let's start with this." I flipped the first page. I didn't do it gently. The paper snapped in the quiet, a sound like a dry branch breaking. I slapped my hand down on a document protected by a plastic sleeve. It was my business license for Townsend Suites. The date at the top was clear, printed in bold, uncompromising black ink. 23 months ago. "Look at the date," I said, leaning in. I could smell her expensive perfume, something floral and cloying that didn't belong in a dusty parking lot. "And look at the state seal. This was registered before you even bought that marble countertop you like to pose in front of. I've been paying taxes and insurance on these recipes while you were still trying to figure out how to preheat an oven." Monica's face didn't just go pale, it turned the color of damp drywall. Her eyes darted to the crowd, looking for a way out, but the line of customers had stayed put. They weren't there for the pies anymore. They were there for the autopsy. I flipped the next page. This one was a sheet from my old yellowed notebook. It was stained with grease and a circular coffee ring from a mug I'd used years ago. At the bottom was a signature in messy blue ink. "That's the head instructor from the vocational school in Scranton," I said, my finger tapping the signature. "That's the man who actually taught me how to laminating dough while I was working 12-hour shifts at the warehouse just to pay the tuition. It's dated 3 years ago. It's the certification for the very crust you're selling over there for $12 a slice." I reached into the side pocket of the binder and pulled out a color-printed photo. It was a screenshot of Monica's Instagram post from 2 days ago. She looked beautiful in it, holding a flour-dusted rolling pin like it was a prop. I started to read her caption aloud, my voice steady and loud enough to reach the back of the line. "Finally sharing my secret family recipe. Grandma always taught me that the secret is in the patience." I stopped. I looked at Monica. Her jaw was tight, her teeth bared in a silent, ugly grimace. "Grandma passed away when you were 12, Monica," I said. "She never owned an industrial mixer. She never made a salted caramel in her life. This notebook, this work, this is mine. And every time you told people it was a family legacy, you weren't just lying to them. You were stealing from me. You were taking my sweat and calling it your own." "Nicole, stop it." The voice came from behind Monica. Diane pushed through the crowd, her face twisted in a mask of practiced concern. She reached for the binder, her fingers clawing at the edge of the table. "You're making a scene," Diane hissed, her voice a low, toxic rattle. "Think about your father. Think about the neighbors. Just put that away and we can go home and talk like adults. You're acting like a child over some silly paperwork." I didn't move. I didn't even look at her. I just leaned my weight onto the binder, pinning it to the table so she couldn't move it. "The door is shut, Diane," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The authority in my tone was a wall she couldn't climb. "You had 14 days before Thanksgiving to talk to me like an adult. You chose to plan a lesson instead. This is the exam. And so far, everyone is failing." I saw Craig then, Monica's husband. He was standing near the back of their booth, his hands jammed into the pockets of his expensive golf shirt. He was a dentist. He liked things clean. He liked things orderly. He had paid for the white vinyl banners and the fancy crates Monica was using to sell my work. He walked forward, his brow furrowed as he looked at the business license and the school certificates. He looked at the dates. Then he looked at the grease-stained notebook. He looked at his wife, whose mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. He was a man who understood contracts. He understood a bad investment when he saw one. Craig didn't say a word. He didn't defend her. He didn't call his lawyers. He looked at the binder, then back at the flashy, fake booth he had funded. Slowly, he took 2 long steps back. He walked to the edge of the pavement and stared at the ground. The support system was gone. The money was out of the room. Monica was standing alone in the middle of a crowd that was starting to whisper. I didn't feel the rush of heat I thought I would. I just felt cold. Efficient. I reached for the corner of the final page in the binder. The crowd held its breath. The sun was high now, casting short, brutal shadows across the lot. I'm not done, I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. I turned the page. This wasn't a business license. It wasn't a recipe. It was a single sheet of paper with a list of dates and dollar amounts. I looked Diane straight in the eye. Now, I said, let's talk about the kitchen renovation you had me pay for while you were telling everyone I was a failure. I kept my hand flat on the paper. The silence was absolute. The Townsends weren't just losing a business. They were losing the only thing that mattered to them, the lie they had lived in for 30 years. I didn't look away. I just waited for her to realize that the bill had finally come due. The final page of the binder didn't look like much. It was just paper and ink, printed in color on a cheap office jet. But as I flipped it over, the air at the Millfield Farmers Market seemed to vanish. The chatter of the crowd, the smell of grilled onions, the distant sound of a folk band, it all went flat. I kept my hand pressed on the page. My palm felt the slight heat of the sun-warmed paper. I looked at my mother. Diane was staring at the printout, her eyes flickering like a dying bulb. This is from 14 days before Thanksgiving, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It was the kind of voice that stops people in their tracks. The planning committee, that's what you called the group chat, right? I didn't wait for an answer. I started to read. Monica, I've got the bulk headphones for my 3. It'll be perfect. Set the tone early. Nicole won't be able to say a word without looking like the jealous sister. I paused. A woman in a floral dress 2 feet away gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I turned the binder slightly so the people in the front of the line could see the time-stamped screenshots. Diane, make sure there are no gift bags for Nicole's kids. She needs to feel the weight of her choices. If she wants to be independent, she can provide for them herself. This is how she learns a lesson. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a storm. I looked at my father, Frank. He was standing 3 feet behind my mother, his hands jammed so deep into his pockets his shoulders were hunched. He wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't look at the crowd. He just stared at a crack in the asphalt, his face a dull, waxen gray. He had seen these messages. He had been in that chat. He had watched his wife plan the emotional mugging of a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, and he had stayed quiet just to avoid a headache. I felt a cold, hard knot of contempt tighten in my chest. He wasn't just a bystander. He was the one who held the door open while the thief walked in. A lesson, I whispered, the word tasting like copper in my mouth. You wanted to teach a lesson to Sam and Lily. You wanted to use their tears to see if you could make me crawl. You didn't care about the pies. You didn't care about the business. You just wanted to see me broken, Diane finally snapped. The mask of the good Christian grandmother didn't just slip, it shattered. Her face twisted, her mouth becoming a thin, jagged line. She stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. All of this drama wouldn't have happened if you had just come home for Christmas, she hissed. Her voice was thin, vibrating with a desperate, ugly energy. If you weren't so stubborn, if you had just apologized for ruining Thanksgiving, we could have been a family again. You're the one doing this, Nicole. You're the one dragging our private business out into the dirt. It was the classic move, the shift, the blame crawl. Even with the evidence staring her in the face, she was trying to find a way to make me the villain of her story. I snapped the binder shut. The sound was like a gunshot. Thud. You don't get it, Diane, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming stone cold. There is no home to come back to. And as for my kids, you don't mention them. You don't look at them. You are officially out of their lives. You don't ever get to touch them again. Before she could scream back, a shadow fell over the table. A man in a tan polo shirt with a market management patch on the chest stepped into the space between us. He had a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt that was chirping with static, a harsh, electric sound that cut through the tension. He looked at the binder, then at Monica's flashy Lawford kitchen booth, then back at me. "Nicole?" he asked. I knew him. He was a local guy, worked the docks before taking this job. He knew what a hard day's work looked like. "The paperwork is on the first page, Mike," I said. "Trademark dispute and evidence of theft. They're selling my registered recipes under a fraudulent name." Mike didn't need to hear anything else. He turned to Monica, who was standing behind her counter, her hands shaking so hard she had to grip the edge of the wood. "We have a zero-tolerance policy for this kind of thing, Monica," Mike said, his voice loud enough for the whole row to hear. "I've seen the emails from the state office. You're in violation of the market charter. You need to pack it up. Right now." Monica's face went from gray to a sickly white. "You can't do that. My husband—" "I don't care about your husband," Mike interrupted. He tapped the walkie-talkie. "I need 2 guys at booth 12 for an eviction. Bring the flatbeds. We're clearing the lot." The next 20 minutes were a slow-motion wreck. The crowd stayed to watch. They watched as Craig, Monica's husband, walked away without saying a single word to her, his face a mask of pure embarrassment as he headed for his SUV. They watched as Monica and Diane had to scramble to tear down the massive gold banner. The metal poles clattered and banged against the pavement, a chaotic, desperate sound. Every time a pole hit the ground, it felt like another piece of their fake life was breaking. Frank stood there like a ghost, eventually helping them throw the crates of stolen pies into the back of the car. They didn't look like the perfect family anymore. They looked like people who had been caught red-handed in a dark room. As the white SUV pulled away, the tires screeching slightly on the hot asphalt, a strange calm settled over booth 14. I stood behind my simple wooden table. Lily's purple crayon sign was still there, sitting right in the center. The line of customers began to move, but they weren't going to the empty space where Monica had been. They were turning toward me. One by one, they stepped up. They didn't ask for samples. They didn't ask for recipes. They just bought what was on the table. Patty walked over from her flower stall, her eyes wet. She didn't say anything. She just squeezed my hand. Her palm was warm and solid. The battle was over. The field was clear. But as I looked at the spot where my parents had stood, I didn't feel like a winner. I just felt like a woman who had finally stopped carrying someone else's luggage. I reached down and straightened the stack of napkins on my counter. Square, orderly, done. The steering wheel felt like a lead weight in my hands. The Pennsylvania backroads were swallowed by a thick, freezing mist that clung to the windshield like wet wool. 55 miles per hour. The low, steady hum of the tires on the asphalt was the only thing keeping me upright. In the back seat, Sam and Lily were slumped against each other, their breathing soft and rhythmic in the dark. I looked at them in the rearview mirror, their small faces illuminated by the green glow of the dashboard. They didn't know about the black binder. They didn't know about the scene at the market or the way the crowd had watched their aunt's empire collapse into a pile of cheap vinyl and lies. They just knew they were safe. They knew that for the first time in weeks, my shoulders weren't pushed up against my ears. The adrenaline was gone. In its place was a bone-deep exhaustion that made my marrow feel like wet sand. I parked the car in the gravel driveway of my apartment complex, the stones crunching under the tires with a sharp, lonely sound. The engine ticked as it cooled, a metallic snapping in the quiet night air. I moved with a heavy, slow precision. I carried Sam in first, his head a warm, dead weight on my shoulder, then Lily. I tucked them into their beds, smoothing the blankets and squaring the pillows with the same extreme exactness I used for my pie crusts. No wrinkles, everything in its place. I stood in the doorway of their room for a long minute, watching the rise and fall of their chests. I wasn't just guarding their sleep, I was guarding the line I had drawn in the dirt. I walked into the kitchen and didn't turn on the light. The only glow came from the street lamp outside, casting long, skeletal shadows across the linoleum. I sat at the small table and listened to the refrigerator. It had a low, rattling hum, a mechanical vibration that felt like the only company I had left. I reached for my phone. It was sitting face down on the laminate counter, vibrating like a trapped insect against the hard surface. Buzz, buzz, buzz. I picked it up. 31 notifications. The family group chat was a digital graveyard. I scrolled through them slowly, my thumb moving with a cold, mechanical detachment. I didn't feel the sting anymore. I just felt a dull sense of recognition, like looking at an old bill you already paid. Monica's messages came in a jagged, frantic stream. You ruined my life. Craig is sleeping in the guest room. You think you are so much better than us because you went away and played hero? You are a backstabber, Nicole. A traitor. You humiliated Mom in front of the whole town. I hope you're happy with your little victory. Then Diane, the master of the guilt crawl. I am sitting here in the dark crying, Nicole. My blood pressure is through the roof. How could you shame me like that? After everything I did for you, after I let you back into this house, you have a black heart. I hope you can sleep tonight knowing what you have done to your mother's health. You always were the difficult one. And finally, Frank, the weak link, the man who stood by while the world burned as long as he had a comfortable chair to sit in. Nicole, please, your mother is inconsolable. Just call and say you are sorry. I know Monica made a mistake, but we have to stick together. I'm sorry it got this far. Just make it stop. I stared at the screen until the blue light burned my retinas. For years, I had chased a phantom. I thought if I worked harder, if I came back with a steady job and a clean life, they would finally see me. I thought my worth was something I had to prove to them, like a debt I could never quite finish paying. I remembered the nights I spent staring at the ceiling in drafty rooms halfway across the country, telling myself that the Townsend name meant something. I thought they hated me because I was a failure. I was wrong. They didn't hate me because I was a failure. They hated me because I refused to be an ornament in their perfect, fake house. They hated me because I was a mirror that showed them exactly what they were: thieves, cowards, and actors. They didn't want a daughter. They wanted a slave. And the moment I stood up, they tried to break my legs. My fingers didn't tremble as I tapped the text box. I typed one single line. No exclamation points. No long explanations. Just a finality that felt like stone. I am done being the ghost in your house. Do not contact me or my children again. This is over. I didn't wait for a reply. I hit the button to leave the group. The screen blinked once, and the planning committee vanished from my list. I went to Monica's contact. Blocked. I went to Diane's. Blocked. I moved to Frank's number. I looked at his name for a long time. I remembered him standing on that porch when I was 18, telling me not to make my mother sad. He was still that same man, a bystander who would watch his own blood drown if the splashing bothered his wife's nerves. I didn't block him. I wanted his calls to go through. I wanted him to hear the empty, hollow ring over and over until the silence finally told him what he already knew: that I was gone. That the seat at the table was empty for good. I tossed the phone onto the sofa. It hit the cushion with a soft, insignificant thud. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The fog was lifting. The neighborhood was quiet. There were no sirens, no shouting, no crashing of metal poles on the pavement. Just the cold, honest Pennsylvania night. I felt a strange, hollow lightness in my chest, like a fever had finally broken. I went to the bedroom and lay down, fully clothed. I didn't set an alarm. For the first time in my life, there was nothing to wake up for except the morning. The house was still. The air was clear. The roots were cut, and for the first time, I felt like I could actually breathe. The morning would come, and for the first time, I wouldn't be looking over my shoulder. I closed my eyes and let the silence take me. It was the best thing I'd heard in years. The May sun didn't have the teeth of the winter. It was soft, pulling the damp smell of spring out of the Pennsylvania soil. I stood in my kitchen, the window cracked open just enough to hear the neighborhood coming to life. No banging on the door, no screaming landline, just the low, steady hum of the refrigerator and the sound of a distant lawnmower. I looked down at the mahogany table. It was covered in stacks of invoices, bank statements, and a thick, heavy envelope with a gold seal from the state trademark office. I didn't need a calculator to know the numbers. Sales for Townsend Sweets had climbed 200% in 4 months. The fake Lawford Kitchen social media accounts had been scrubbed from the internet, gone like smoke in a high wind. I held the trademark certificate in my hands. My thumb traced the raised ink of my own name. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't an inheritance. It was a receipt for every hour I'd spent standing until my ankles swelled and every meal I'd skipped to buy a bag of high-grade flour. It was mine. I set the paper down and turned to the stove. The air in the apartment was thick with the scent of rosemary and roasting chicken. It was May, but the menu was different. I called it the May Thanksgiving. I moved through the kitchen with a quiet, sharp efficiency. I didn't rush. I folded the linen napkins into exact squares, lining them up with the edge of the plates. I checked the oven. The chicken was golden, the skin bubbling with fat. I pulled it out and set it on the counter. The sound of the hot metal settling was a small, satisfying pop. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 p.m. It wasn't a frantic thud. It was a polite, steady chime. I opened the door to find Patty and her husband, Dan. They weren't carrying hidden agendas or loaded questions. Patty held a bowl of potato salad wrapped in tin foil, her face creased into a genuine smile. Dan had a 6-pack of local lager under his arm. "Smells like a dream in here, Nicole," Dan said, stepping onto the linoleum. "Table's almost set," I replied. I took the salad from Patty. Her hand brushed mine, warm, solid, and real. We didn't talk about the Townsends. We didn't mention the white SUV or the empty silent house on the other side of town. We talked about the weather and the new commercial oven I was eyeing for the shop. Patty laughed, a loud, honest sound that filled the corners of the room where the ghosts used to hide. I went back to the table for the final touch. I reached into a drawer and pulled out 2 bags. They weren't brown paper or cheap plastic. They were silver foil, shimmering under the kitchen lights, tied with thick, crisp white ribbons. I placed them exactly where Lily and Sam were going to sit. Last November, those seats had been a hole in the world. They had been a statement of my failure. Today, they were the center of the room. "Dinner's ready," I called out. Sam and Lily came running from the bedroom, their socks sliding on the wood floor. They stopped at the table, their eyes wide as they saw the spread. Sam's gaze locked onto the silver bags. He looked up at me, his face a mix of confusion and hope. "Is that for us, Mom?" he asked, his voice small. "But it's not even a holiday." I sat down and pulled him close. I ran my hand over his hair, feeling the warmth of his head against my palm. I looked at Lily, who was already reaching for the silver ribbon. I didn't feel the tightness in my chest anymore. I didn't feel the need to look over my shoulder. The cycle was broken, the chain was snapped. "Everything good on this table is yours, Sam," I said. My voice was steady, a promise carved in stone. "It's always going to be yours. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to beg for it. You just have to be here." He grinned and tore into the silver paper. The sound of the foil crinkling was loud and bright. Lily laughed, holding up a new set of headphones. The good kind, the ones I'd saved for 3 weeks to buy. They didn't look back. They didn't ask about Grandma or Aunt Monica. They were too busy living in the house I had built for them. I looked at Patty and Dan. They were already fixing their plates, passing the gravy and the rolls. This was the family I had chosen. The ones who stood in the cold with me. the ones who didn't share my blood but shared my weight. I picked up my fork and felt the cool metal in my hand. I looked at the empty wall where the phone used to hang, the cord now long gone. The silence wasn't a threat anymore. It was a victory. I took a bite of the chicken, the rosemary and salt hitting my tongue. It tasted like the truth. I leaned back in my chair and watched my children play with their gifts. The sun was starting to dip, casting a long golden light across the floor. I didn't need anything else. The bill was paid, the debt was settled, the Townsends were a memory, and I was finally home. I reached out and tightened the knot on my own napkin one last time. Square. Perfect. Finished.